The sound that changed everything wasn't a gunshot or a scream. It was the sharp, splintering crack of polished mahogany against bone. Jennifer Turner felt the fire race up her arm before the pain registered her husband's face, a mask of fury above her. He'd used his grandfather's walking stick, the one he kept by the fireplace, as a symbol of his supposed heritage. In that moment, as she crumpled to the marble floor, Jennifer understood. This wasn't a marriage. It was a cage, and her husband Mason had just made the fatal mistake of forgetting that some cages are guarded by dragons. He had no idea who her brothers were. He was about to find out. The charity gala at the Astor Ballroom was the kind of event Mason Turner lived for. It was a glittering sea of old money and new ambition, a place where a handshake could be worth more than a mid-sized corporation. He moved through the crowd with a practiced ease, his wife Jennifer, a graceful shadow at his side. To the outside world, they were the perfect couple. Mason, the sharp ascendant financier with a charming smile, and Jennifer, his beautiful quiet wife, whose serene presence seemed to anchor him. Her dress a simple but exquisitely tailored navy gown by a little-known Parisian designer shimmered under the crystal chandeliers. "Darling, you see Mr. Beaumont over there." Mason murmured, his hand a possessive weight on the small of her back. "Chairman of Beaumont Global. I need an introduction." Smile, look attentive. Jennifer produced the required smile. She had become an expert at producing the right expression at the right time. Attentive, admiring, content. It was a role she played a part in the grand production of Mason's life. They had been married for 5 years, a whirlwind romance that had swept her off her feet. He had been passionate, driven, and utterly captivated by her. Or so she'd thought. Now she understood he had been captivated by the idea of her, the gentle, well-bred woman from a family with comfortable means, who would be the perfect, non-threatening accessory to his ambition. She had never told him the truth about her family. When he'd asked, she'd simply said her father was a successful businessman and that her brothers were in business as well. He'd pictured a regional manufacturing plant, perhaps some lucrative real estate holdings. He accepted her family's desire for privacy as a quaint, old-fashioned eccentricity. The modest trust fund she'd brought into the marriage was in his eyes the extent of their wealth. It was enough to secure the down payment on their sprawling penthouse on Park Avenue and grease the wheels of his first few ventures, but it was nothing compared to the empire he planned to build. He had no idea that her modest trust was merely the pocket money from a fortune so vast it could swallow his ambitions whole without even registering the meal. Her brothers, Rowan, Finian, and Killian. The thought of them was a distant comfort, a warmth she hadn't felt in years. They were formidable, intensely private and fiercely protective. When she'd announced her engagement to Mason, they had been skeptical. Rowan, the eldest, had run a background check so thorough it could have qualified for a security clearance. Finian, the charismatic middle child, had grilled Mason over a 2-hour lunch that Mason later described as more intense than a federal audit. Killian, the youngest and most volatile, had simply looked at Mason with cold, assessing eyes and said, "You hurt her, I'll find you." Mason had laughed it off as the overblown threat of a provincial brother. He had no clue that Killian's promise was as binding as a contract signed in blood. The cracks in their perfect marriage had started as hairline fractures. A sharp word in private, a dismissive wave of his hand when she offered an opinion. Then came the control. He vetted her friends, discouraged her from pursuing her own career in art curation, and slowly, systematically isolated her from the world, including her family. Calls with her brothers became stilted, supervised affairs. "They're a distraction, Jennifer," he'd say. "We need to focus on our future." Tonight the tension was a humming wire beneath the surface. A major deal Mason had been counting on had collapsed that afternoon. He was blaming a junior analyst, the markets, the weather, everyone but himself. He was drinking more than usual, his grip on her arm tightening every time someone offered him condolences on the deal. Back in the silent, sterile expanse of their penthouse, the facade shattered. Jennifer was taking off her diamond earrings when he cornered her in the dressing room. "Beaumont barely gave me the time of day." He spat, yanking at his bow tie. "Did you see the way he looked at me? At us? It's because we're not on the inside." "Not yet." "It takes time, Mason," Jennifer said softly, her voice calm and even. "You're building something. These things don't happen overnight." "Don't patronize me," he snarled, his face twisting. "You and your comfortable little family. You have no idea what it takes, the risks I'm taking every single day." He gestured wildly around the room at the rows of his custom-tailored suits and her designer gowns. "This doesn't just appear, Jennifer, I bleed for this." He had been working himself into a rage, a terrifying storm she had learned to weather by staying as still as possible. But then he did something new. He grabbed her wrist, his fingers digging in like talons. "Maybe if you made more of an effort." He hissed, his face inches from hers, the smell of whiskey, sharp and sour. "If you were more charming, more engaging. If you weren't so forgettable." The word struck her with the force of a physical blow. She pulled her wrist back instinctively. "Don't." Her defiance seemed to enrage him further. His eyes, usually a calculated blue, were dark with a fury she'd never seen up close. Before she could react, his hand flew the back of it, cracking against her cheek with a sound that seemed to suck all the air from the room. The shock was a white-hot flash, followed by a blooming, throbbing pain. She stumbled back, her hand flying to her face, her eyes wide with disbelief. It was the first time he had ever laid a hand on her. The rage in his face vanished as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by a flicker of panic, then a wave of calculated remorse. "Jennifer. Oh God, Jennifer, I'm so sorry," he said, rushing forward. "I didn't mean. The stress, the deal. I'm not myself." He tried to touch her, but she flinched away, a raw animal instinct taking over. He stopped, holding his hands up in a gesture of surrender. "Baby, please. I love you. You know I do. It will never, ever happen again. I swear it on my life." He was a good actor. His voice was filled with a convincing anguish, his eyes brimming with tears. And because she wanted to believe him, because the alternative was too terrifying to contemplate, Jennifer allowed herself to be pulled into his arms. She let him whisper apologies into her hair. Let him promise it was a one-time mistake. But as she stood there, rigid in his embrace, the side of her face burning, she knew. A line had been crossed. This was not a mistake. It was a beginning. The months that followed the first slap were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Mason was a Jekyll and Hyde of breathtaking skill. In public, he was more attentive than ever, showering Jennifer with gifts, a rare first edition book, a Cartier bracelet, a surprise weekend trip to the Hamptons. He was the doting husband, contrite and loving. But in the soundproofed sanctuary of their penthouse, the monster he kept leashed was straining at its collar. The verbal abuse became a constant, a corrosive acid dripping onto her soul. She was stupid, tasteless, uninteresting. Her opinions were worthless. Her family was a pack of provincial nobodies. He chipped away at her confidence piece by piece until she began to doubt her own mind. The physical violence was infrequent, but always followed the same pattern, an explosion of rage, the shocking impact followed by a flood of apologies, lavish gifts, and suffocating affection. He was breaking her, and then convincing her that his love was the only thing that could piece her back together. His financial pressures were mounting, and the apartment grew thick with his desperation. He was taking bigger risks at his firm, leveraged to the hilt, chasing a game-changing deal that would finally catapult him into the stratosphere he so craved. And with his desperation came a new fixture in their lives, Bianca Shaw. Bianca was everything Jennifer was not. She was a brash, raven-haired marketing executive from a rival firm with a shark's smile and an ambition that matched Mason's. Jennifer first saw them together at a restaurant, laughing over a bottle of expensive wine. Mason claimed it was a business meeting. Then she smelled Bianca's cloying perfume on his suit jacket. He said he'd bumped into her at a conference. The lies were clumsy, almost insulting in their transparency. Soon he didn't even bother to lie. He spoke of Bianca, openly praising her killer instinct and business savvy, every word a thinly veiled criticism of Jennifer. The affair was an open secret among their social circle, a humiliation Jennifer was forced to endure with a placid smile at every gallery opening and charity dinner. Mason seemed to relish it, the power he held over her, forcing her to be a spectator to her own betrayal. The breaking point came on a cold Tuesday night in October. The market had taken a nosedive, and Mason's high-risk investment portfolio was hemorrhaging money. He came home drunk, his face ashen with fury and panic. Jennifer was in the living room arranging some flowers she'd bought, a small act of beauty in an increasingly ugly world. He saw the flowers and sneered. "Playing house while my empire burns. How nice for you." He walked over to the ornate mahogany fireplace, where his grandfather's walking stick rested on two brass hooks. It was his prized possession, a symbol of the old money lineage he had fabricated for himself. He took it down, running his hand over the polished wood and the silver wolf's head handle. "I called your father today," he said, his voice dangerously low. "I thought maybe for once your comfortable family could do something useful. I suggested a small bridge loan, a few million, just to ride this out." Jennifer's blood ran cold. "You did what?" "He turned me down flat," Mason hissed, turning to face her, the heavy stick held loosely in his hand. "Said their assets were tied up. The peasant. You had no right to call him," Jennifer said, her voice shaking with a rage she rarely allowed herself to feel. "My family's finances are none of your concern." "They are my concern when I'm the one keeping you in Chanel," he roared. He took a step toward her, using the stick to point at her. "You and your useless, secretive family. You've been a dead weight around my neck from the beginning." She stood her ground. "Get out, Mason!" The words hung in the air. She had never spoken to him that way before. His face contorted the civilized mask, melting away to reveal the feral beast beneath. "What did you say to me?" he whispered. He didn't wait for an answer. He raised the walking stick. It was a slow, deliberate motion, filled with menace. Jennifer threw her arms up to protect her face, a primal scream catching in her throat. The first blow landed on her forearm with a sickening thud. The pain was immediate, a blinding, white-hot agony. She cried out, stumbling backward. He hit her again, this time across her ribs. She fell to her knees, gasping for air. He stood over her, his face a grotesque canvas of rage. "You are nothing without me." He snarled, his voice guttural. "You are my wife. You will do as you are told." He drew the stick back for another blow, aiming for her head. She scrambled away, crawling desperately toward the kitchen. He followed his steps, heavy and menacing. He swung again, and she twisted her body the silver wolf's head of the cane, catching her on the shoulder. The force of the impact was so great that she heard a distinct crack. Not her bone, but the wood itself. The walking stick had splintered. Mason stared at the broken cane in his hand, his rage momentarily forgotten, replaced by a look of stupid shock, as if he'd just broken a favorite toy. That brief pause was all Jennifer needed. Fueled by a surge of adrenaline and terror, she scrambled to her feet and ran. She didn't stop until she was in the master bathroom, the heaviest door in the apartment, and had slammed the lock shut. She collapsed against the cold tile, her body screaming in pain, her mind a maelstrom of horror. He pounded on the door, screaming her name, alternating between threats and tearful apologies. Jennifer ignored him. She was looking at her reflection in the vast, gold-framed mirror. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with terror. A dark, ugly bruise was already purpling on her cheek. She carefully pulled up the sleeve of her silk blouse. The mark on her forearm was a horrifying masterpiece of red and swelling blue, the clear imprint of the cane. Something inside her, something that had been dormant for 5 years, finally snapped. This was not love. This was not a mistake. This was an execution, and she was the victim. Her hands shaking, she reached for her phone, which was miraculously still in her pocket. She ignored Mason's bellowing on the other side of the door. Her breath came in ragged sobs as she opened her camera, her fingers clumsy and slick with a cold sweat. She took a single clear picture of the brutalized flesh of her arm. Then she opened a secure messaging app, one her brother, Rowan, had insisted she installed years ago, just in case. She found the group chat titled Family. The last message was from Finian, 2 weeks ago, a picture of a sunset over the Pacific. She attached the photo of her arm. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, shaking too violently to type a full sentence. She managed only 3 words. Code black. Now. She pressed send. On the other side of the door, Mason was still yelling. He had no idea that he had just signed his own death warrant. He had beaten his wife with a stick. And now 3 dragons were stirring from their slumber, and they were coming for him. The message landed at 10:17 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, hitting 3 phones across 2 continents with the force of a detonation. In a glass-walled office overlooking the glittering expanse of Tokyo, Rowan Lilia was analyzing algorithmic trading data. At 35, he was the eldest, a man who seemed to be composed entirely of sharp angles and quiet intensity. His mind was a fortress of logic and strategy. He ran Lilia Industries, a global tech conglomerate, so diversified and deeply embedded in the world's infrastructure that it was less a company and more a sovereign corporate state. His phone buzzed a unique encrypted tone, reserved for only 2 numbers, his brothers. He glanced at the screen. The image of Jennifer's bruised arm loaded, followed by the 3-word message. The data on his multiple monitors seemed to melt away. The world narrowed to that single horrific photograph. The color drained from his face, replaced by a glacial calm that was far more terrifying than any outward display of rage. Code black was a phrase they had invented as children, a distress signal of the highest order, never to be used lightly. It meant one of them was in mortal danger. It meant all bets were off. Rowan did not hesitate. He swiveled in his chair and spoke into his desk comm. Yuki, cancel my appointments for the rest of the week. Have the jet ready for takeoff in 1 hour. Destination New York. Thousands of miles away in a bustling London editing suite, Finian Lilia was approving the final cut of a global advertising campaign for a luxury car brand. At 32, Finn was the public face of the Lilia Power, the charismatic media mogul. His company Argent Media Group owned everything from fashion magazines and news outlets to film studios and PR firms. He was a master of narrative, a man who could build a reputation or destroy one with a single, well-placed story. He was laughing with his team when his phone chimed. He stepped into the hallway to view the message. The laughter died in his throat. He stared at the picture of his little sister's arm, his handsome features hardening into a mask of cold fury. He saw the imprint of the weapon, a stick, a cane. The sheer barbarism of it made bile rise in his throat. He called his assistant. "Charlotte, clear my schedule, indefinitely. Get me on the first flight to JFK. I don't care if you have to buy the entire plane. And I want a complete dossier on a man named Mason Turner and a woman named Bianca Shaw. I want to know where they eat, where they sleep, who they bank with, who they've slept with. I want every skeleton in their closets exhumed and catalogued by the time I land. Use our top people. No budget." On a remote oil rig in the stormy North Sea, Killian Lilia, the youngest at 29, was overseeing a critical deep-sea drilling operation. He was the enforcer, the blunt instrument of the family's will. He had taken the more traditional brutalist parts of their father's empire, global shipping, private security resource extraction, and honed them into a razor's edge. He was covered in grease and salt water, shouting over the roar of the machinery when the satellite phone on his hip vibrated. He wiped his hands on a rag and retreated to the relative quiet of a small control room. The photo took a moment to load over the weak connection. When it did, a primal stillness fell over him. The men on the rig knew Killian's temper. It was a legendary force of nature. But this was different. This was a silence that felt like the pressure drop before a hurricane. He didn't need to see the code black message that followed. The picture was enough. He keyed the radio. "Shut it down," he barked at his foreman. "We're done here." "Sir, we're not scheduled to—" "Did I stutter?" Killian's voice was lethally quiet. "Get the chopper fueled. I'm going to New York. Now." While Mason Turner was passing out, in a drunken stupor on the living room sofa, 3 separate vectors of immense power were converging on him. He was a gnat in the crosshairs of a laser grid he didn't even know existed. Killian was the first to arrive. He landed at a private airfield in Teterboro, New Jersey, just after dawn. A black armored SUV was waiting. He didn't go to the penthouse. That would be too direct, too crude. He went to the small independent coffee shop 2 blocks away, where Jennifer sometimes went to read. He sat in a corner, a simple baseball cap pulled low, and he waited. His instructions to Jennifer, sent via the secure app, were simple. "Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m., go for a walk, usual coffee shop. Leave your phone. Bring your passport. Don't look back." The next morning, Jennifer moved like an automaton through the wreckage of her life. Mason was a wreck, pleading, crying, begging for forgiveness. He blamed the alcohol, the stress, his uncontrollable love for her. She said nothing, her face a blank canvas. She told him she needed some air, that she was going for a walk to clear her head. The flicker of hope in his eyes that she might forgive him again was nauseating. She left the apartment wearing a simple trench coat over a pair of jeans, her purse containing only her wallet and passport. She left her phone on the kitchen counter, a digital leash she was finally severing. Every step away from that building felt like a step toward oxygen. She walked into the coffee shop, her eyes scanning the room. She saw him immediately. Killian. He was bigger than she remembered, his shoulders straining the fabric of his plain grey t-shirt. He looked up, and his eyes, the same dark blue as their father's, met hers. They held a galaxy of rage, but it was all for Mason. For her there was only a deep, aching tenderness. He stood up, crossed the room in 2 long strides, and wrapped his arms around her. Jennifer buried her face in his chest, and for the first time in 24 hours she let out a choked, ragged sob. The dam of her composure broke, and years of pain, fear, and humiliation came pouring out. "It's okay, Lee," Killian whispered, his voice a low rumble. I've got you. We've got you. It's over now." He gently guided her out the back door of the coffee shop, where the black SUV was idling its engine, a quiet promise of escape. As they pulled away from the curb, blending into the morning traffic, Jennifer looked back one last time at the gleaming glass tower where she had lived a beautiful lie. It already looked like a tombstone. In his penthouse, Mason Turner checked his watch. She had been gone for 20 minutes. He started to feel a prickle of unease. He called her phone. It rang and rang from the kitchen counter. He was not a man who believed in bad luck. But as he stood there, listening to the unanswered ringing, a cold dread began to seep into his bones. The world was tilting off its axis, and he had no idea why. Rowan Lilia arrived in New York 18 hours after Killian touching down at the same private airfield. He wasn't met by an SUV, but by a mobile command center, disguised as a luxury Sprinter van. Inside a team of 4 of his best analysts sat before a bank of monitors, their faces illuminated by the glow of cascading data. Rowan stepped inside, shedding his travel jacket without breaking stride. "Status report," he said, his voice crisp. Jennifer was secure. Killian had taken her to a private Lilia property in Connecticut, a sprawling, heavily guarded estate she hadn't visited since she was a girl. She was safe. That was phase 1. Now phase 2. The demolition could begin. "Turner is a house of cards, Mr. Lilia," said a young analyst named Cole. "His firm Turner Capital is leveraged at a ratio of 30 to 1. He's been using a predatory algorithm to short volatile tech stocks. High risk, high reward. Right now, it's all risk." Rowan stared at the data streams. Mason's entire financial existence was a frantic, high-wire act, and he was performing it without a net. His primary line of credit, Cole continued pointing to a highlighted section on the screen, is with Sterling Rhodes Bank. A $500 million line personally guaranteed. He secured it using his wife's signature as collateral, citing her significant family assets as a backstop. A muscle twitched in Rowan's jaw. Mason had not only abused his sister, he had used her name and their family's phantom reputation as a gambling chip. "Who do we know on the board at Sterling Rhodes?" Rowan asked, his voice dangerously soft. "Lawrence Talbot owes us for the Shanghai Telecom deal," Cole replied instantly. "Get him on the phone," Rowan commanded, "and I want to see every single one of Turner's positions. Every stock, every bond, every derivative. I want to know what he had for breakfast this morning and which way his shadow fell at noon." For the next 4 hours, Rowan Lilia conducted a symphony of destruction from the back of the van as it cruised silently through the streets of Manhattan. It started with a phone call to Lawrence Talbot. There was no threat, only a calm, reasoned expression of concern about Turner Capital's over-leveraged position and potential character liabilities of its founder. Rowan suggested that given the market's current volatility, it might be prudent for the bank to review its exposure. Talbot, a man who understood the subtle language of power, immediately grasped the unspoken message. An emergency risk assessment meeting was called at Sterling Rhodes. Meanwhile, Rowan's team was mapping out Mason's portfolio. They found his linchpin, a massive leveraged bet against a small but innovative biotech firm, Omnigen. Mason was counting on the FDA rejecting their new cancer drug, a move that would send their stock plummeting and net him a fortune. Rowan smiled a thin, predatory expression. "Omnigen," he said to his team. "Let's buy it." It wasn't a stock purchase, it was a corporate acquisition. Using one of Lilia Industries' many anonymous holding companies, Rowan initiated a tender offer for Omnigen at a 40% premium over its current market value. The news hit the financial wires at precisely 2:15 p.m. The effect was instantaneous. Omnigen's stock didn't just rise, It erupted. It soared by 45% in the first 10 minutes. For Mason Turner, sitting in his office and frantically trying to understand why Jennifer wasn't answering her phone, it was an extinction-level event. The margin call alarms on his terminal began to scream, a digital chorus of his own ruin. He was facing a loss of over $200 million in a matter of minutes. He tried to liquidate other assets to cover the margin, but suddenly his other positions began to nosedive. It was uncanny, as if an invisible hand were pressing down on every stock he owned. A rumor expertly planted by Finian's network and amplified by Rowan's algorithmic trading bots began to circulate about a federal investigation into Turner Capital's trading practices. It was a complete fabrication, but in the panicked market, rumors were as good as facts. At 3:30 p.m., the fatal blow landed. He received an automated email from Sterling Roads Bank. Due to a reassessment of risk, his entire line of credit was frozen effective immediately. A formal notice followed the full balance of the loan was being called in. He had 5 business days to produce $500 million he did not have. Mason stared at the email, his mind unable to process the speed of his own collapse. This wasn't bad luck. This was a coordinated, systematic execution. One moment he was a titan in the making. The next, he was financially vaporized. He stumbled out of his office, his face pale and slick with sweat. His employees were gathered around a television, watching a financial news anchor discuss the unprecedented and targeted collapse of Turner Capital. His phone rang. It was Bianca. "Mason, what the hell is going on?" She shrieked, her voice stripped of its usual seductive purr. "My credit cards were just declined. They're saying the corporate account is frozen. I'm handling it." He lied, his own voice sounding hollow and distant. "You'd better be," she snapped. "I'm not going down with you." The line went dead. Mason walked back into his office and sank into his $1,000 leather chair. The view of the city, once a symbol of his impending conquest, now seemed to mock him. He had lost everything. His company, his money, his mistress. His wife was gone, and he had absolutely no idea who was responsible. He was a man being haunted by ghosts he couldn't see, punished for a crime he thought he had committed in the dark with no witnesses. He didn't know that the walls themselves had eyes, and they belonged to a family that never forgave and never, ever forgot. While Rowan was dismembering Mason's financial empire with the cold precision of a surgeon, Finian Lilia was preparing his own theatre of operations. If Rowan controlled the flow of capital, Finian controlled the flow of information, reputation, and shame. He landed at JFK and went straight to the penthouse offices of Gilt, a glossy magazine that served as the Bible for New York's elite, one of the many jewels in Argent Media's crown. His team had worked through the night. The dossier on his desk was 6 inches thick, a comprehensive account of every lie, every indiscretion, and every hidden vulnerability in the lives of Mason Turner and Bianca Shaw. Finian read it with the focused intensity of a predator studying its prey. He told people his grandfather was an ambassador, Finian said with a dry chuckle, flipping a page. He was a shoe salesman from Toledo, and he gestured to Bianca's file. She has a history of targeting wealthy married men. Left a trail of 3 ruined marriages in Chicago before she came here. This is perfect. Finian's campaign was not a frontal assault. It was death by 1,000 cuts, a slow public strangulation. He began by activating his network of society columnists and influencers, all on Argent Media's payroll. The first wave was subtle, a blind item in a widely read gossip column about a hotshot financier whose over-leveraged lifestyle was about to come crashing down. No names were mentioned, but the details were specific enough to set tongues wagging. The next day, As the news of Turner Capital's implosion became public, Finian escalated. He leaked a carefully selected photo to a rival publication. It showed Mason and Bianca on a yacht in St. Bart's, a trip Mason had told Jennifer was a solo business retreat. The photo was intimate damning and published alongside an article detailing the lavish gifts Mason had showered on Bianca, all paid for, with funds from his now bankrupt company. Suddenly, Mason wasn't just a failed financier. He was a philandering cliché who had defrauded his investors to fund a sordid affair. The social dominoes began to fall. Invitations to upcoming events were rescinded. His membership at an exclusive country club was put under review. Friends who had clapped him on the back a week ago now crossed the street to avoid him. He was radioactive. But Finian's true masterpiece was reserved for Bianca. He discovered that her entire career was built on stolen ideas and fabricated credentials. She had taken credit for a junior colleague's award-winning campaign to get her current position. Finian's team contacted that colleague, offered her a senior position at one of their own top-tier ad agencies, and helped her lawyer draft a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against Bianca and her firm for intellectual property theft. The story broke on the front page of a major business journal, another Argent Media property. Bianca Shaw was exposed as a fraud. She was fired within the hour, escorted from her building with her belongings in a cardboard box, a horde of paparazzi conveniently tipped off by Finian's people documenting her walk of shame. The final act of Mason's social execution was the charity gala for the Children's Literacy Fund, the very event where he had paraded Jennifer around like a trophy. It was the pinnacle of the fall social season, and Mason, in a last desperate act of defiance, decided to attend. He thought he could face down the Whispers Project, an image of strength. He arrived alone. The moment he stepped into the ballroom, a chilling silence fell over the crowd. Every eye was on him. People turned their backs, conversation stopped mid-sentence. It was a perfectly choreographed shunning. He was a ghost at the feast. He saw Bianca across the room, desperately trying to talk to a group of people who were looking through her as if she were made of glass. Their eyes met for a moment, filled not with longing, but with a shared, bitter hatred for each other. They were two drowning swimmers, each trying to use the other's head to stay afloat. The event's host, a society matron named Beatrice Lowell, strode to the center of the room. Finian had known her for years. A quiet donation of a new library wing from a Lilia Foundation had secured her complete loyalty. "Ladies and gentlemen," Beatrice announced, her voice ringing with authority. "Before we continue, I feel it is necessary to address an unpleasant matter. It has come to our attention that certain individuals in our midst have conducted themselves in a manner that is antithetical to the values of this community and this charity. We believe in integrity, loyalty, and basic human decency." Her eyes locked onto Mason. "Therefore," she continued, her voice like ice, "we must insist that anyone who does not meet that standard is no longer welcome here. Not tonight. Not ever." It was a public excommunication. Humiliation washed over Mason in a hot, suffocating wave. He turned and fled the ballroom, the sound of renewed chatter and clinking glasses chasing him out into the cold night. He was a pariah. Finian, watching from a live security feed in his office, allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. He had not laid a finger on Mason, but he had stripped him of his name, his reputation, and his place in the world. He had made him a nobody. And the final confrontation, the one where Mason would learn the names of his destroyers, was still to come. For a week, Mason Turner existed in a state of suspended shock, a ghost haunting the opulent tomb of his former life. The phones had stopped ringing. The penthouse, once a symbol of his arrival, was now a silent, cavernous prison. Creditors' notices and legal threats piled up by the door. He was ruined, socially executed, and utterly alone. He spent his days in a whiskey-fueled haze, cycling between impotent rage and a gnawing, terrified confusion. He still didn't know who had done this to him. He just knew it was personal. The summons came in a plain white envelope, delivered by a courier who looked more like a special forces operative than a delivery man. It wasn't a legal document. It was a simple high-quality card with a time and an address. Tonight, 9 p.m., the Sterling Tower, 80th floor. There was no name, no explanation, just a command. Desperate for answers, for a face to put to his ruin, he went. The Sterling Tower was a monument of dark glass and steel, a needle piercing the night sky. The 80th floor wasn't an office. It was a vast, empty space under construction owned by a shell corporation that Rowan had activated that morning. The only things in the cavernous room were a single steel table and 4 chairs illuminated by a harsh industrial work light. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking, godlike view of the city he had tried to conquer. 2 of the chairs were already occupied. As Mason stepped out of the private elevator, his steps echoing in the silence, he saw them. 2 men impeccably dressed, sitting with an unnerving stillness. One was lean and sharp, with an aura of intense intellectual power. The other had the polished charm of a film star, but his eyes were as cold as a winter sea. Rowan and Finian. Mason had never met them, but he recognized them from the business journals. These were Titan's men who operated in a different stratosphere. His confusion deepened. What could the CEO of Lilia Industries and the head of Argent Media possibly want with him, Mr. Turner? Rowan said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. He did not stand. "Thank you for coming. Please have a seat." Before Mason could speak, the elevator doors opened again. The third man who stepped out was different. He was younger, with a raw physical presence that seemed to fill the room. There was a dangerous energy coiled within him, and as he walked into the light, Mason felt a primal jolt of fear. It was Killian. Mason recognized him from a photograph in Jennifer's collection, the provincial brother he had once dismissed. Killian didn't sit. He stood behind the empty chair, his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on Mason with an expression of pure, unadulterated loathing. "What is this?" Mason demanded, his voice trembling slightly. "Who are you people? Why are you doing this to me?" "We're Jennifer's brothers," Finian said, a pleasant smile on his face that didn't reach his eyes. "And we're doing this because you made a series of very poor decisions." The name Jennifer hit Mason like a physical blow. The puzzle pieces scattered and chaotic suddenly slammed together into a horrifying picture. Jennifer's quiet family, her secretive, comfortable background, her brothers who were in business. It had all been a lie, or rather a truth so far beyond his comprehension that it might as well have been. "My brother Rowan here," Finian continued, gesturing with a lazy grace, "was responsible for the, let's call it, market correction that dismantled your company. He felt your business practices were unsound. I, Finian went on, handled the public relations side of your recent troubles. Your reputation, it seems, was as over-leveraged as your portfolio. People are talking." Mason stared at them, his mind reeling. The scope of their power was dizzying. They hadn't just attacked him, they had erased him. "And Killian." Rowan picked up his voice, still unnervingly calm, "is in charge of asset recovery." At that, Killian took a step forward. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a familiar object, placing it on the table with a heavy thud. It was the silver wolf's head handle from Mason's grandfather's walking stick. The mahogany shaft was gone, splintered and broken. "This," Killian said, his voice a low growl, "is an asset. You used it to strike my sister." He pushed it across the table toward Mason. "And for that there is an accounting." Mason flinched back, as if the silver were red hot. For the first time he understood the true nature of his predicament. This wasn't about money or business. This was retribution. "I can pay you back," he stammered, his arrogance crumbling into pathetic desperation. "The money from the loan. I can get it." Rowan laughed, a short, sharp, mirthless sound. "Mr. Turner, you misunderstand. Your debt is not monetary. You took something from our family. You hurt our sister. You broke a promise. The money is irrelevant." "So what do you want?" Mason whispered, his eyes darting between the three brothers. "Are you going to kill me?" "We are businessmen, Mr. Turner, not murderers," Finian said smoothly. "Killing you would be messy, and far too quick. We prefer a solution that is more permanent." Rowan slid a thick folder across the table. "Inside that folder is your future, or rather, your two possible futures. Option A. You sign the documents within. They include a full confession to wire fraud and embezzlement, which my team has already documented quite thoroughly. They also include divorce papers in which you waive any and all claims to any marital assets, and a restraining order that stipulates you will never come within 500 miles of Jennifer or any member of our family again. You will hand over your passport, and we will give you a one-way plane ticket to a place where you will never be heard from again. You will live out your days in obscurity and poverty. You will become nothing." "And option B?" Mason asked, his throat dry. "Option B," Killian said, taking another step closer, "is that you refuse to sign. In which case, this folder," he tapped it with a finger, "goes directly to the U.S. Attorney's office. You will be arrested tomorrow morning. With the evidence we possess, you will be convicted on multiple federal counts. You will spend the next 20 to 30 years in a maximum security prison. When you get out, you will be old, broken, and still nothing." Mason stared at the folder, then at the faces of the three men who had systematically demolished his world. There was no negotiation in their eyes, no mercy. Only the cold, hard finality of a perfectly executed plan. He had gambled everything on his own ambition, and had lost to a power he never knew existed. He had struck a woman he thought was defenseless, and in doing so had brought the wrath of gods down upon himself. His hand, shaking Mason Turner, reached for the pen. The sun rose over the rolling green hills of the Connecticut estate, casting a golden light across the manicured lawns. Jennifer stood on a stone terrace, a warm mug of tea in her hands, watching the morning mist burn off the distant woods. She had been here for 2 weeks, in the quiet sanctuary of her childhood home. The bruises on her body had faded from violent purple to a mottled yellow-green, but the healing that mattered was happening somewhere deeper, in a place that bore no visible scars. For the first few days, she had simply slept, her body and soul exhausted from years of walking on eggshells. Killian had stayed with her a silent, comforting guardian. He didn't press her to talk. He just sat with her, read in the same room, or walked with her through the gardens, his presence a solid, unwavering shield. Finian and Rowan had arrived after their meeting with Mason. They didn't give her the sordid details, not at first. They simply told her it was over. Mason was gone, and he would never bother her again. She saw the grim satisfaction in their eyes, and knew, without needing to be told, that his exit from her life had been decisive and absolute. Later, sitting before a crackling fire in the grand library, they told her everything. They explained how Rowan had dismantled his finances, how Finian had shredded his reputation. They told her about the choice they had given him, and the confession he had signed. He's a ghost now. Jennifer. Rowan said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. He has no money, no name, and no future. The legal proceedings for the divorce will be handled quietly. You will never have to see him or speak his name again. Jennifer listened, a profound sense of release washing over her. It wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. It was about the rebalancing of a universe that had been tilted so violently against her. "And Bianca?" she asked quietly. "A pariah," Finian said with a dismissive wave. "Sued into bankruptcy and blacklisted from her industry. She'll be lucky to get a job as a hostess. They were two parasites who tried to feed on you. We simply starved them of their host." In that moment, looking at her brothers, the strategist, the storyteller, the soldier, she felt a surge of love so powerful, it almost brought her to tears. They had shielded her from the details of their methods, but she understood the truth. They had waged a war on her behalf. They had moved mountains and commanded armies all for her. "Thank you," she whispered the words, feeling achingly inadequate. "You're our sister Lee," Killian said, his voice rough with emotion. "There is no thank you necessary. Not ever." The weeks that followed were a period of rediscovery. She started to paint again, filling canvases with bold, vibrant colors that had been absent from her life for too long. She reconnected with old friends, her laughter echoing in the halls of the house, a sound her brothers hadn't realized how much they'd missed. She was no longer Jennifer Turner, the silent, elegant accessory. She was Jennifer Lilia, and she was slowly remembering the strength that name held. One afternoon, a lawyer arrived with the finalized divorce papers and a portfolio. It contained the details of a new foundation already legally established and endowed. It was called the Phoenix Foundation. Rowan had provided the capital, Finian the media strategy, and Killian the security infrastructure. Its mission was to provide legal aid, safe housing, and comprehensive support for victims of domestic abuse, specializing in cases where the abuser wielded significant financial or social power. "It's yours to run if you want it," Rowan explained. "You'll have all the resources you need." Jennifer looked down at the prospectus, her name listed as founder and chairwoman. It wasn't just a gift. It was a purpose, a way to transmute her pain into power, her suffering into a shield for others. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Yes, I want to." Months later, Jennifer stood at a podium in a crowded ballroom, launching the Phoenix Foundation. She was not the timid woman who had once stood silently beside Mason Turner. This woman was poised, confident, and powerful. Her speech was not about her own story, but about the countless stories of those who suffered in silence. Her brothers stood in the front row watching her with undisguised pride. She had walked through fire and emerged, not burned, but forged. The world had known her as the wife of a man who beat her. Now they would know her as the woman who built an ark for the broken. A woman who, with the unwavering love of her family, had turned her deepest wounds into her greatest strength. She was no longer a victim in a gilded cage. She was a Lilia. And she was finally free. The story of Jennifer Lilia is a stark reminder that the deepest betrayals often come from those we trust the most, and that true strength isn't the absence of fear, but the courage to act in spite of it. Her journey from a silent victim to a powerful advocate shows the incredible resilience of the human spirit. With the unwavering support of her three formidable brothers, she not only escaped her abuser, but ensured he faced a reckoning that stripped him of everything he valued. It's a chilling tale of justice, a testament to the unbreakable bonds of family, and a powerful lesson that for every bully who believes he is untouchable, there may be guardians in the shadows you never see coming. If this story of ultimate revenge and triumphant survival moved you, please show your support by hitting the like button and sharing it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell for more incredible stories of justice and empowerment. Thank you for listening.